Hi there, I'm Matt, one of the developers here at Tech Studio, and today I'd like to talk about our latest PS3 and PC title, X-Sledding 3000. I'm going to walk you through the game, highlight the menu options available, and explain how you actually play the game. X-Sledding 3000 is a moderately paced, tactical racing game set in the ultra-competitive world of robotic animal racing. To give you the background, set in the year 3000, which we thought would be pretty awesome, in a world where sledding with real animals has been banned, leading to the development of ultra-realistic robot animals, or robo-animals, enabling the world's most popular sport to continue, and in an extreme fashion, no less. With that fabulously rich and immersive backstory in mind, let's take a look at the game itself, starting with the menu. If you've ever played any kind of computer game before, this part should be hopefully pretty familiar. Once the game's loaded, this is the first thing you'll see, the main menu. From here you can choose a game mode to play, customise the various game options, or, if for some reason you want to miss out on all the fun, quit the game. Now, as with all the menus in the game, it's basically represented by a set of buttons. On the PC, you can select one of these by pressing the left mouse button, cycle through them using the W and S keys and press enter to choose one, or navigate using an Xbox 360 controller. On the PlayStation 3, obviously you'll be navigating with the controller. We'll talk about controller support in a minute, but for now, let's just focus on mouse and keyboard controls. So, let's select the options menu and take a look at that in more detail. Here we see the options menu for the PC, where you can change the volume of any background music or sound effects, change the display resolution and graphics settings to suit your PC's hardware, and switch to full screen for the complete X-Sledding experience. These are the slider controls, and you can change their values by dragging the scroll tab with your mouse, or, on the keyboard, selecting them with W and S and moving them left and right with the A and D keys. The full screen option is a basic checkbox and works like any other button to toggle full screen. At this point, it's worth mentioning that any key binding can be changed in the controls menu. In here you can customise any key or button as you see fit. Also note, whatever you set as whip and treat will be used to navigate through the menu elements. Some of the button names might seem a bit cryptic right now, but trust me, it'll make sense once we get into the game itself. As you can see, on the PC version you can also customise the button configuration for the controller. Before moving on, it's worth mentioning a couple of the differences between the PlayStation 3 and PC options. Since the PS3 is a fixed platform, you don't have any graphical adjustments to worry about, just the volume controls. And you can rebind the controller in exactly the same way as you do on the PC. As I mentioned before, you can get around the menu with a controller on either platform. Choose up and down on the D-pad to highlight a menu element, and press the whip button to select it. Okay, with all of that covered, let's get set up to race. So, let's jump into our first game mode, Time Trial. The aim of this mode is simply to beat the fastest lap time for a given track. There's no limit to how many times you can go around the track, it's just you against the clock. On selecting the mode, you're first presented with a track selection screen. Each track in X-Sledding 3000 is designed to give you a slightly different challenge, and on this screen you can cycle through them using the left and right chevrons, and you'll see a shot of each one to give you an idea of what it's all about. Snowy Peaks is the most straightforward track, so in the interest of not showing myself up, I'm going to stick with that one for now. On clicking next, we're presented with the animal selection screen. Racing in X-Sledding 3000 is all about the animal pack, and here we get to decide what robo species we're going to race with, along with which individuals are going to make up the pack. As you can see, each animal has 3 colour-coded stats associated with it. Those stats tie into the core gameplay mechanic, which we like to refer to as the Energy, Discipline and Morale System, or EDM for short. Before going any further, I'm going to explain exactly how that works, because everything after this point is going to make a lot more sense once you've got your head around it. We wanted to reflect the fact that you're being pulled along by an animal pack, so you don't have direct control over your speed, like pressing an accelerator pedal in a car. Instead, you've got to manage the behaviour of your pack with all that entails. To simulate this challenge, each animal has 3 values that you'll need to balance: energy, discipline and morale. Energy, represented by the colour green, is the value that has the most impact on your speed. The higher it is, the faster you'll go. But conversely, the faster you go, the quicker that value is going to decrease. Discipline, represented by the colour blue, represents how much control you've got over the animal. If it drops too low, it's going to start getting a bit rebellious and your sled will become much harder to steer. Finally, we have morale, represented by the colour red, which also affects your overall speed, albeit to a lesser degree. Now, each of these values will have an impact on the other two, for better or worse. For instance, if your discipline's high, your steering is going to be more stable, but your morale is going to drop quickly, meaning that you'll lose speed. There are other ways in which these values interact, but we'll cover those in more detail once we get racing and you can see the EDM system in action. Back to the animal selection. The 3 bars you see next to each animal represent how much they're going to contribute to the rest of the pack with regards to that aspect of the EDM system. Now, as well as having this variation between individuals, you're going to notice some overall differences in speed and handling depending on which species you choose. As you can see, I'm putting together my pack by selecting the species on the left, scrolling through the list of individuals on the right, and clicking on the ones I want to take into the race. With all 4 slots filled up, I'm ready to go, so let's start racing. So, here we are on the track. Before we go any further, let's just take a second to go through the HUD. Now, most of it's pretty self-explanatory, but there's just a few things I want to highlight. In the top left of the screen, you have your progress bar. Quite simply, this tells you how far you are around the current lap. In the bottom right, there's a speedometer bar and a representation of the whip button to let you know it's being pressed. And last but definitely not least, we have the main HUD in the bottom left corner. The most important part of that is the 3 bars showing the current state for each of your values in the EDM system. Obviously, the taller the bar is, the higher the value. And next to that, we have the treat button, which I'll talk about a bit more once we get into the details of the gameplay mechanics. So, first thing you need to do once the race has started is crack the E-whip to get your pack running. So let's do that now by, as you can probably guess, hitting the whip key. Okay, now, once we're moving, just like with any other racing game, you can press left and right to steer the pack and your sled, and brake to slow you down. Where X-Sledding 3000 stops being like any other racing game is how you build up speed. As I mentioned before, the more energy and morale you have, the faster you'll go. These values will deplete over time, but you can replenish them by pressing the treat key and giving them a treat. You'll notice that there's a number under the treat button on the HUD in the bottom left corner. Well, that tells you how many you've got left, and you can run out of them, so you have to be careful how often you use them. That said, you'll be able to pick up more on the track, but we'll cover that in a second. At this point, you may have noticed that the pack's veering all over the track. Well, that's what happens when your discipline drops too low. And as you can see from the blue bar in the HUD, mine's pretty low right now. To bring the discipline back up, just press the whip key to activate the E-whip. You can do this as many times as you want during a race, but there's a catch. Whilst applying the whip makes your discipline go up, it also gives you a significant drop in morale, as you might expect, along with a slight decrease in energy. So too much whipping is going to have a serious impact on your speed. The result of all this is that keeping your speed up involves a careful balancing act between the 3 values. Referring back to the animal selection screen briefly, you remember each individual has those 3 bars. In practice, these bars will tell you how much of a boost the values will get from whipping and from treats. So bear that in mind whilst you're building your pack. One thing to note is that if you give your animals a treat whilst they're stationary, rather than raising morale and energy there and then, you'll actually increase the size of the boost you'll receive. So you can choose to use your treats for that if you want instead. Each track is made up of a series of waypoints. By now, you've probably noticed the massive green arrow above the course. Well, this tells you where your next waypoint is, and you'll have to follow them in sequence if you want to complete the lap. If you get lost and you can't find the marker, or you just get stuck in some trees, you can press the reset button, which is R by default, and it'll take you back to your last waypoint so you can go from there. Now, as you're racing, you'll notice a number of coloured orbs scattered around the course. These are power-ups, and they do one of a few things. Now, obviously, the one we're marked treat, the black and white one, that'll give you an extra treat, unsurprisingly. The bright orange ones will give you an immediate speed boost, and the other 3 are colour-coded to match the EDM system. If you pick up one of these, you'll max out the respective value for the next few seconds, regardless of what's happening, which can be pretty useful. The last aspect of the gameplay worth mentioning is the camera system. Now, the default camera mode is chase view, that's what you're looking at here. And by cycling through, using the V and C keys by default, you can go to top-down view, which looks like this, and first-person view. You can also look at what's behind you with the rear view camera. And to turn that on, that's E by default. So, there you have it. In a nutshell, that's how you play the game. Once you decide to quit the race, if you've got one of the top 3 all-time fastest laps for that track, you can enter your name and go down in X-Sledding history. With that covered, all that's left to talk about is our other game mode, Versus mode. A Versus mode plays in exactly the same way as time trial, same controls and everything. The big difference is that now, instead of trying to beat your fastest lap, you've got another fellow sledder to race against. Going back to the menu for a second, you can choose between an easy or difficult opponent, depending on how brave you're feeling. Once you're in the race, you notice a couple of differences to the time trial. In the bottom left of the HUD, you'll now see your position number, and you'll want to try and keep that at 1, because you have 3 laps to complete, and whoever's in first place when they finish the 3rd lap wins.